I never imagined that a quiet Tuesday morning could explode into a nightmare that would haunt me for weeks. I had just buckled my newborn into the car seat, double-checking the straps, the blankets, the tiny hat that kept her warm against the brisk autumn air. The driveway was empty, except for my neighbor's teen, who had been lingering suspiciously on the edge of the property for days. I knew something was off, but I brushed it off, thinking teenagers were always curious, sometimes reckless. In hindsight, curiosity was the understatement of the year. I stepped inside the house for a moment to grab my coffee and a diaper bag. That split second was all it took. I heard the engine roar and the tires squeal before I could even react. Rushing to the window, my heart dropped into my stomach. The teen I had casually waved at just minutes ago was sliding into my car, my newborn strapped safely, so I thought inside the back seat. Panic surged, adrenaline flooding every nerve. I sprinted outside, yelling her name, demanding she stop. She glanced back, eyes wide with fear and defiance, and slammed the car into gear. Everything happened in seconds, though it felt like an eternity. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands, my voice a mix of terror and fury. My child is inside the vehicle stolen. Please, send help immediately. The operator's calm voice barely grounded me. All I could see was the car tearing down the street, my tiny daughter inside, and my neighbor's adolescent thief laughing, oblivious to the consequences about to crash down. As I tracked her on the phone, the adrenaline sharpened my focus. I remembered the hidden dash cam I had installed weeks ago after Karen's incessant complaints and spying. The camera footage had captured the teen loitering, suspiciously eyeing the car. I immediately accessed the live feed remotely, and to my shock, the teenager was fully visible, smirking at the camera in disbelief at how easy she thought this theft was. I could hear my own voice in my head. Not on my watch. Here's where the first twist hit. From behind the trees lining my property, my cousin, an off-duty state trooper named Jaden, appeared, sprinting towards his cruiser with lightning speed. He had been alerted earlier by a neighbor who noticed the teen skulking around my driveway. The timing was uncanny. We were both moving as if choreographed by fate itself. Jaden radioed in, confirming he was in pursuit, and I followed on foot, shouting and pointing, every fiber of my being screaming for the teen to stop. The chase intensified quickly. The car swerved dangerously along side streets, but Jaden stayed on it with professional precision, coordinating with dispatch to cut off the escape. I stayed close enough to keep my child in sight, heart hammering, lungs burning. The neighborhood blurred past. Parked cars, scattered leaves, startled pedestrians. Every second felt heavier than the last. Every rotation of the wheels was a drumbeat of terror. Finally, the teen made a critical error. Trying to cut through an alleyway, she misjudged the curb and locked the tires against the edge, causing the vehicle to jerk violently. My newborn began to wail, piercing the chaotic morning with a cry that felt like the world itself calling for justice. I ran faster, screaming at the teen to release the vehicle, my voice hoarse but unwavering. The teen panicked, fumbling with the gear shift. Jaden, arriving at the perfect angle, expertly boxed in the car, leaving no avenue of escape. Within moments, the teen surrendered. Jaden opened the door, lifted my daughter into my arms, and the tears I had been holding back exploded. Relief, rage, fear, and a raw sense of triumph washed over me simultaneously. I couldn't stop shaking as I hugged my newborn, whispering promises I never thought I'd have to reinforce. You are safe. I will protect you. I will not let anyone take you again. The teen's expression shifted from bravado to terror as deputies arrived, handcuffs clicking, mirroring the sound of consequences finally catching up. Karen, of course, appeared shortly after, shouting indignantly that I had overreacted, trying to claim some twisted moral high ground. Her usual fat, self-important glare was no match for the overwhelming presence of law enforcement and the undeniable evidence: the dashcam footage, multiple eyewitnesses, and Jaden's report of the pursuit. She stammered, sputtered, and eventually slunk away, her aura of intimidation shattered in front of everyone who had witnessed the morning's events. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The teen was charged with grand theft auto, child endangerment, and reckless endangerment, her parents forced to confront the gravity of what had happened. The community rallied, offering support, sharing messages of relief, and praising the swift, coordinated response that prevented what could have been a tragedy. Karen's credibility evaporated completely. Her previous complaints and attempts at control were now seen in stark contrast to the life-threatening chaos her actions or inaction had emboldened. Even weeks later, the story continued to reverberate. Media outlets covered the incident, highlighting not only the courage of the community, but also the role of careful planning and vigilance. My dash cam, a simple precaution inspired by months of HOA disputes and Karen's overreach, had turned into a key piece of evidence that prevented disaster. It became a lesson, not just in protecting one's property or child, but in the power of preparation, presence of mind, and community alliances when faced with unexpected danger. In private moments, I reflected on the volatile mix of fear and adrenaline that morning. Each decision, from recording suspicious behavior to strategically involving Jaden, mattered. It was proof that calm, decisive action, coupled with allies ready to intervene, could prevent catastrophe and bring justice swiftly. I realized that entitlement, recklessness, and the illusion of power embodied perfectly in Karen and her enabling of local teens cannot withstand preparation, courage, and law-abiding vigilance. My daughter's laughter and coups in the days following became symbols of survival and resilience. Neighborhood kids waved with newfound respect. Neighbors shared tales of similar near misses, and community safety meetings became active forums rather than lectures dominated by entitlement. Karen's decline was complete. Ostracized, exposed, and stripped of authority, she served as a warning about the limits of coercion and the inevitability of accountability. Justice, in this case, was swift and unequivocal. The teen learned the hard way that dangerous actions carry immediate consequences. Karen, who had spent years projecting power and cultivating fear, discovered that authority without respect or legality crumbles when challenged by truth and evidence. And I learned that vigilance, quick thinking, and the right allies can turn near tragedy into a story of triumph and education for everyone involved. Reflecting on it all, I realized this was more than a personal victory. It was a lesson in courage, preparedness, and community responsibility. No amount of intimidation, entitlement, or misguided authority could override the clarity of truth, the protection of the innocent, or the justice delivered by those willing to act decisively. The story became a cautionary tale, a lesson in law, morality, and vigilance, reminding everyone that protecting what matters most, whether property, family, or community, requires attention, action, and sometimes allies who show up when they are needed most. Even after the legal proceedings concluded, the echoes of that morning remained vivid in my mind. The adrenaline, the fear, the relief, it all mingled into a haze I would never forget. The neighborhood had changed too. What had once been a quiet cul-de-sac, where Karen's presence loomed like a shadow over every yard and driveway, was now alive with conversation, collaboration, and cautious optimism. Residents spoke freely at HOA meetings, voices no longer trembling with fear, but steady, confident, and determined to prevent another crisis. Even Karen's usual allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with her discredited and exposed reign. I spent hours reviewing the dashcam footage and the 911 calls, piecing together every second of the ordeal. Each replay reminded me how quickly a situation could escalate from mundane to life-threatening, and how preparation and vigilance were the thin line between chaos and safety. The teen's reckless decision to steal the car was shocking, yes, but the presence of allies, the dashcam evidence, and the swift action of law enforcement had transformed what could have been a tragedy into a story of community resilience and swift justice. I realized how crucial it was to remain calm, assess the situation, and act strategically even in moments of intense emotional stress. Surprisingly, the incident ignited a broader movement. Neighbors reached out, asking for guidance on child safety, property security, and neighborhood watch initiatives. I worked with Jaden to organize workshops and informal training sessions, teaching families how to prepare for emergencies, document suspicious behavior, and act within the law when confronting danger. Maya, though quieter in the public sphere, continued to advise from behind the scenes, sharing her tactical knowledge and helping residents understand how to assert their rights safely. Our combined efforts transformed the neighborhood into a proactive, educated, and empowered community. Karen, predictably, tried to regain influence, sending passive-aggressive letters and attempting to manipulate HOA policies in her favor. But the events of that morning had destroyed her credibility beyond repair. Residents now recognized her as a figure of chaos and entitlement rather than authority, and her attempts at subtle intimidation were met with collective resistance. The teenager involved in the car theft became a cautionary tale herself, her parents forced to take accountability for the consequences of negligence, and she faced counseling, probation, and community service that emphasized the gravity of endangering a child. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. I took long walks around the property, watching the sunrise reflect off the car's hood, the same car that had been stolen but now stood as a symbol of survival and vigilance. My newborn grew, unaware of the chaos she had endured in her first days of life, her laughter and coos a soothing contrast to the memories of terror. Each milestone, her first crawl, first steps, first words, felt like a quiet victory over the fear that had once gripped me. Karen, meanwhile, became a near-mythical figure in our neighborhood discussions, her failures serving as lessons in accountability, humility, and the limits of unchecked power. Children whispered about her dramatic collapse, teenagers learned the consequences of recklessness, and adults recognized that community vigilance, strategic action, and moral courage could triumph over intimidation. Her attempts to manipulate situations were no longer feared; they were studied, analyzed, and ultimately dismantled before they could cause real harm. Looking back, I realized that the incident had changed me as much as it had changed the neighborhood. I had learned the value of preparedness, the power of documentation, and the importance of allies who act with integrity. I had seen firsthand how quickly fear can be transformed into empowerment when guided by law, strategy, and moral clarity. And most importantly, I had witnessed the fragile illusion of entitlement crumble when confronted with accountability and truth. The story didn't end at the courthouse or with Karen's humiliation. It continued in the small daily actions that ensured safety and justice. The neighbors checking in on one another, the collective awareness of property and child safety, the workshops that taught the next generation to act responsibly, and the quiet moments where vigilance became habit rather than reaction. Karen had been dethroned, the teenager had been held accountable, and a community had been strengthened. What could have been a tragic headline became instead a narrative of courage, resilience, and systemic reform. Even now, I share the story with visitors, new neighbors, and friends who ask how we handled what seemed like an impossible situation. I emphasize the lessons learned, document everything, act decisively but lawfully, rely on allies who are prepared and ethical, and never underestimate the power of community support. Fear can be paralyzing, but clarity, preparation, and swift, strategic action can turn even the most terrifying moment into a story of triumph. In quiet reflection, I consider how many incidents of entitlement and recklessness go unchecked in neighborhoods across the country. Karen's actions, though extreme, were not isolated; they were symptomatic of a culture where rules are manipulated, intimidation is normalized, and consequences seem distant. But the morning of the car theft proved that intervention, preparation, and collective responsibility can rewrite that narrative, replacing fear with justice and complacency with vigilance. And so, every time I see my daughter play safely in the yard, or neighbors gather for casual conversation with smiles instead of anxiety, I remember the fragile line between chaos and safety. The lesson is clear. Those who try to wield power recklessly will eventually face the consequences, and those who act with courage, clarity, and community support can protect what matters most. Karen's collapse was bitter for her, but illuminating for everyone else. Entitlement and intimidation are fragile when confronted by truth and prepared action. What do you think? Was the teen's arrest and Karen's public humiliation the right outcome? Or should there have been a different path? Did the community act justly, or did the response go too far? Share your opinions and debate right versus wrong, because these moments are where courage, accountability, and justice intersect, teaching lessons that ripple far beyond a single driveway or a single morning.